Keith Wynne with Chronicle. I'm the deputy editor. Pretty much just cover football there. I leave the basketball up to Mike and the other guys. Those guys know their stuff, obviously. So you can catch me over there at Chronicle covering anything from recruiting to opponent breakdowns to recaps of the games also.
Yep, and I'm Presley Meyer. I'm a co-site expert at Big Red Louie, host of the Big Red Louie podcast. Kind of cover basketball, football, and everything in between.
All right, and I'm Alucard with Cardinal Craze on Twitter, where I cover football, just mainly, and I'm not professional. All right, let's start. All right, so today we're going to be breaking down the Louisville defensive depth chart and kind of taking a look at this coming season and different players on the depth chart who may be starters or who may shine. All right, so I guess first place we're going to start with is corner. Where are you guys feeling about corner? We got a couple people on corner currently. What's your feeling towards that?
Yeah, I mean, when you take a look at what the depth chart could look like going into this season, this is kind of an area where it looks like Louisville is starting to develop a little bit more depth, but it's a lot of younger talent. So the only senior on the roster at corner right now, senior scholarship player, is Marlon Character, and he's going to be a guy that's going to be definitely vying for a lot of playing time and perhaps a starting position. And then in addition to Character, you have two juniors in Chandler Jones and Anthony Johnson, who, if you read our site a lot, I know my co-expert Jacob Lane is a huge Anthony Johnson guy. But yeah, there's a lot of young, talented depth. They brought in quite a few guys in the 2020 recruiting class as well. But if I had to choose today, I think that Jones and Johnson would be kind of the cornerstones, no pun intended, at corner. I'm not sure how you feel about that, Keith, but I know you're a little bit more of a football-minded person, but to me, I think that if you look at Jones and Johnson, those are the two more athletic, more when they came in, I felt like they had a little more raw talent than anybody else on the roster.
Yeah, I really like it's funny, I was going back and reading I do a way too early depth chart after somewhere around the spring or right after the bowl game to kind of throw it out there, and I had to eat some crow on Chandler Jones. I just never really thought that he was truly going to be a good cover corner, and he completely proved me wrong. So I think one big thing they have going for him is that they have the potential of Jones taking that next step and becoming a guy that can really kind of shut down his side of the field, where teams are able to throw away from him, or he can really make those impact plays. And if you have that, then they really just have to worry about that other side. I'm a big Anthony Johnson fan also. I really like the way he plays. He kind of has that tenacity, that aggression. But Marlon Character stepped up and made some plays also. So they at least have two guys they can work with that they feel comfortable with, and hopefully with another year of coaching under Brian Brown, another year in the system, all that, that's going to be across the board. Hopefully guys take that step forward. The question is, can they be more consistent, especially with Johnson and Character? We saw those guys gave us some big plays, whether it be in Wake Forest or the Miami game. And you've got to have, in that defense, they're going to be aggressive. You've got to be able to cover. And if they can get those guys to be a little bit better from that standpoint, they should be much better this year. And then you just have to worry about depth, and that's going to be everywhere. But the young guys they brought in, Greedy Vance is a really, really good player. I think he's going to be a guy that will see the field. Jamel Starks had to sit out last year. I think he was a guy that I was really high on in the class before. So you have some young guys that I think they can at least rely on to provide some kind of depth, but they really don't have much behind that top level. And that really hurts them when it comes to some of the other formations they want to run. They run nickel, when they run dime. You want to be able to bring in other cover guys. Well, when you only have three of them that you know that you feel good about, now you have to put another safety in. And, that's not really ideal. So the depth is the biggest concern, but I think if Chandler Jones can take that step forward, it's going to help the defense as a whole. That's a big thing, to be able to have a guy that can kind of be a shutdown corner kind of guy.
Mm-hmm. Now, how do you all feel about, now you had mentioned Jamil Stark. How do we all feel kind of towards Marquis Lowry? I know I'm kind of high on Marquis personally. Now, you had mentioned Anthony Jones being a redshirt junior, and Marlon Character. He's actually a senior this year, so he's going to be gone next season.
Well, I mean, I like Lowry. I think he's a guy that fits what they like to do. He's long. He's an athletic guy. I thought, he was a late addition to the class. They lost a guy when Chuba Purdy and Josh Griffiths decided to flip to Florida State. So they brought in a guy that I think they were recruiting, didn't offer because they didn't have a spot for him. He was an under the radar kind of guy, but you watch his film and I mean, he's exactly what they want. They want long guys that have those long arms, can really get after in coverage, because that's, and we've seen it here in Louisville. When you don't have guys that can truly cover at corner, they're just, the value isn't really high on them. You need guys, especially when you're going against ACC talent. There are a lot of good receivers, a lot of good quarterbacks. You got to be able to go out there and actually make a play on the football. And Marquis Lowry fits that. He's a guy that can actually go after the ball, knock passes down, pick off passes. Same with Greedy Vance. He had 7 or 8 interceptions last year. When you see the guys they're recruiting, they just got a commit from Rance Connor Jr. down in Florida. He's a guy that had 7 or 8 interceptions last year. They want guys that can actually play the football and make a play on the ball, not just run with guys and make the tackle after they make the catch. So that's where Marquis Lowry fits. Whether or not him coming in January is actually a huge plus, obviously. Whether or not he's the guy that can play above Vance or Starks, we'll have to wait and see, but I think he'll actually see the field this year for sure.
Yeah, no, most definitely.
And to add to that, I would just say that Lowry is definitely a guy that was not on many people's radar. So I think that he's one of the recruits that we probably know the least about, or, we know the least about what the staff's opinion would be. The one thing about Starks is that he was one of the higher rated players coming into last year's class. So it'll be interesting. We'll get into the defensive line a bit later too, but the 2 highest rated players that the staff brought in last year actually didn't even make the roster. So
yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see what that looks like with those guys having an extra year kind of layoff, but that we're able to kind of get things in order and be able to be on the roster this incoming season. Starks is definitely a name that could find its way into the 2 deep and provide some serious depth, or some talented depth, I would say.
Yeah, no, most definitely. Starks and Jadarian Boykin were, now the fans may not remember who specifically had to sit out, but it was both Starks and Boykin. Now they will be playing. Jadarian Boykin came in as a 4-star recruit that Louisville was able to get, I think, in the 2019 season, or I'm sorry, 2019 recruiting class. It was kind of there at the end. Now we move on to defensive backs. Now we have a massive depth currently at defensive backs, which is a lot, very, very surprising from last season. Last season it was almost just this reshuffle of everybody at new positions. And so how are we feeling towards defensive backs?
So I think, you lose Kane Pass as safety. It's a loss from a standpoint of the experience, but I do think there's a potential to maybe get a more athletic guy there. Brian Brown's defense, their safeties typically have been kind of extensions of cornerbacks. They like those guys to be able to cover, whether it be tight ends or slot receivers. They want guys that can run. And for all the positives of Kane Pass, one of the negatives is that he wasn't necessarily a very speedy guy, and he played well. I don't want to sound like I'm down on the guy, but for what they're looking for, they want guys that can run a little bit better. So there's a potential with Isaiah Hayes being healthy. He's probably the likely guy to take that free safety spot, since Russ Yeast will be back and be healthy by fall. At least that's what they're projecting as of right now. So at the top of the 2 deep there, you got a guy in Isaiah Hayes who was a starter out of Arizona before he transferred. Russ Yeast is one of the best defensive players they have. And then you have some depth. You have Jack Fagot, who played well last year as a former walk-on who earned his scholarship. And then you have some young guys that I'm really excited about. Lovey Jenkins is a guy that I'm really excited about. He's already put on about 15 pounds since he got to campus. He's a ball hawk, exactly the type of player that they're recruiting, guys that can make plays on the field. So I think that from a two-deep standpoint, they're good. And then you have guys like Josh Minkins coming in who will come in the fall and potentially be able to see the field this year. They're going to have young guys playing this year. So to be able to have guys that we feel good about, or at least I feel good about, is definitely positive.
Yeah, it definitely is. I think that the one concern, and it's been something that we brought up quite a bit on the Big Red Lily podcast just over the off season, is just how important remaining healthy, especially at that safety position, is going to be. Because, I mean, as you saw last year, when you lose Rush East and you lose Isaiah Hayes, then all of a sudden you have Jack Fagot, who's a former walk-on, starting with relatively no depth behind him.
Yeah.
They're starting to build that depth, and luckily they can kind of navigate around that with – they have some pretty outstanding depth at linebacker where they can kind of play that guard position, where you can have some linebackers kind of slide into that kind of safety role. But it'll be interesting to see what the dynamic is this year. I think I agree with you, Keith, and I do have Yeast and Hayes as the projected starters. And it will be interesting to see where teams go on offense now that they can't really exploit Kane pass. There's not really a spot where they can exploit anybody's lack of speed this year.
Right.
So it'll be interesting. Kane pass was great from the aspect of he can really get downhill and just like lay the wood on somebody.
Yeah.
But he wasn't one of those guys that's going to be able to hold his own in coverage play after play. So it'll be interesting to see this season. They get a little bit smaller, but they get a little bit deeper as well. So it'll be more of what Brian Brown is looking for going forward. So I think that'll be exciting to see.
I think one guy that, you pointed out the guys at linebacker that might be able to slide back. Trinell Troutman is a safety by trade. They moved him out to the card spot right around the time that Rush East got injured, which was very weird to me. Still don't understand it, to be completely honest. But I think their goal for him is to be Rajay Burns' backup, to be a guy they use situationally, and eventually he'll be the guy to take over next year. But I think that if in a pinch, he could definitely move back to safety. It's around 200 pounds, so it's not like they put a ton of bulk on him. But he's a guy that I really loved at safety. I think the issues they had with him were actually the same issues they had with Kane Pass, where he was really good in the box, could do some things, cover to a certain degree, but couldn't do it consistently. Like you said, he's not going to run with guys down the field. You can pick him out and pick on him. And I think that's maybe why they moved his position to try to maximize him as a player and try to make sure they're not putting him in a bad spot. That's my theory, at least, because I can't stress. I don't understand any other reason why they would move him there, especially when he wouldn't be starting. And he's a guy that, Gigi Robinson. I remember after the season, someone asked him, "Who's the guy that fans should be looking for next year?" And without, right off the top of his head, Trinell Troutman. So I think he's a player. They've just got to find a spot for him. So I think that if they were in a pinch, he's a guy that can maybe move back to safety and provide some more depth for him also.
All right. Yeah, no, I concur with both you guys. I mean, it's honestly just kind of going to be a toss-up a little bit. I feel like we're going to see a lot of people step up. One of the things that I've mentioned before is that we're going to see a lot of freshmen playing. This is now they may be second string. There may be a couple of guys who might work their way into first string depending upon how fall practice turns out, which from what I hear, fall practice is going to be starting up quite soon, actually. I think
back next week, and they're going to do I guess staggered when they come back. But I think Satterfield said he wants by the end of July for them to start that 6-week program that they're trying to get everybody to do. So.
All right, sounds good. Can't wait to get hopefully the press will be loud out there when they have some of the practices. All right, so next we move on to let's see. All right, next we move on to outside linebacker. Looks like there is 10 positions currently. How are we feeling about that?
Yeah, I mean, if you just look at the sheer number of players on the roster, at linebacker, it's clear that there's still a little bit of an imbalance left over from the previous coaching staff as far as there's definitely more of a need. It's safety and corner, and as we get to it, there's a little bit of a need as well on defensive line where they're trying to develop depth. But if you want to talk about a position on this defense that does have a little bit of depth, it would be at linebacker. And not only do they have depth, but they have a lot of talented depth. I think at outside linebacker, we talked a little bit about Rajay Burns, and he's a guy who's going to be an outside linebacker who can slide into that card role. So he's kind of a multifaceted sort of guy who can play in multiple different positions, which is always beneficial to a defense. And then obviously Nick Okeke is going to be returning as well. You talk about two outside linebackers who are completely different as far as size and skill set. But Okeke is a little bit more of a traditional size linebacker. And then inside linebacker, I think that CJ Avery and Dorian Etheridge are probably two of the most talented players on the roster. So as far as the starters go with that 3-4 defense, it's good. They have a plethora of linebackers. And then you'll see on our side a lot, we are huge fans of Monty Montgomery and Yasir Abdullah. Both of those guys are more in the mold of a Brian Brown type of defense in that they're probably not going to be starters this season, but when they rotate in, those guys can wreak havoc in the backfield with their speed and matchup issues. And then the last person I would throw out there as far as that's probably going to work his way into the 2 deep that most people have kind of forgotten about is PJ Blue. He's going to be a 5th-year senior this year. Was out for the entire year last year. He's a guy that we talked about a lot in the offseason going into last year. Sustained an injury, I believe, before the season began, but he's a guy who has provided pretty significant contributions, and he's a guy who I believe will probably work his way into the 2 deep this season.
Now, I actually had the opportunity to sit down and talk to PJ Blue. Now, he has told me that he has recovered and he's just getting ready. And he had actually mentioned to me that during the outbreak, because he was on the medical recovery, I don't know what the official word would be for that, but essentially he was allowed into the training area. And he could train. Now, he couldn't be near anybody, but he was allowed into the facilities to be able to work out. He told me he's going to be ready for fall camp, and he's excited for the season coming in. One of the people that, Keith, I believe you were very high on was Cam Wilson. I believe you had mentioned to me.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say that Cam Wilson is coming in with Dorian Jones. Dorian Jones sat out, and I think, he was a redshirt freshman. I believe he had an injury during the fall last year and was recovering from that and had to miss the entire season, being able to play in 4 games. But outside of that, Zay Peterson is still high on my list. And one of the interesting people that I am really expected to have a breakout year is Robert Hicks. Now, personally, I think Robert has put on a ton of muscle, a ton of weight. I think he's really going to be playing a bigger role this season up front with Monty Montgomery.
Yeah, I think one thing that they have at linebacker that they haven't had, that they didn't have last year, is trusted depth. And what I mean by trusted depth is having guys that just having guys that you can throw out there is one thing. They had bodies. They could have put a guy out there and say, hey, well, you've been here. We can play you. You're not a freshman, or whatever it may be. I think going into year 2, you know exactly what you have. If you can trust that guy to go out there and still and keep things at least to a level. Because the worst thing you can do is put your backups in and then you give up 7 points because these guys just can't. They don't understand the defense, or hey, they make a mistake, or this, that, and the other. When you can trust those guys, I think that's going to be a huge thing for their defense. And one thing they have going for them is guys like PJ Blue, if he's healthy, can back up a Rajay Burns, and Rajay can come off the field. Same with Trinell Troutman. Okay, we can take him off the field and trust that, hey, we have a guy that's at least talented enough and understands the defense that we can give our starters a rest. Because that was a huge issue last year, is that as the season went on, these guys just wear down. And it's natural. it's not necessarily always the big injuries like a PJ Blue or Dorian Jones.
Mm-hmm.
It's the nicks and bruises, it's nicks and cuts, bruises. It's the wearing down of your body. And by the time the middle of the season, late season comes on, the third quarter, it might as well be the fourth quarter now. So that was what I think they had a huge issue with. And I pointed this out before. And the best example I can give that is when they had their third down package in last year, Gigi Robinson didn't come off the field. Gigi Robinson isn't a pass rusher. It's not a knock on him. He's just not. He's a defensive tackle. They would move him to defensive end and bring Jared Goldwire in. Well, you want to have guys that you can just say, hey, this is a situation that you're going to play. They were able to do that with Monty Montgomery, and he led the team in sacks, led the team in forced fumbles. He came in on third downs and was able to make those plays. At linebacker, they're so deep, at least in my opinion, they're going to be able to do a lot of things to take those guys, the starters, off the field if they need be, bring in situational guys to rush the passer, to cover, or to be the goal line, the run stoppers. Robert Hicks is a guy, like you mentioned, he's a bigger, stouter guy. You can bring him in as a third linebacker, take a guy like Rajay Burns off, who's a little bit smaller, and now you have three bigger linebackers out there. Being able to do that this year is going to be really beneficial to the defense outside of just the starters. And I think that's a big thing for Brian Brown. He likes to move guys around, throw in different guys, and I think it's going to be really big. And linebackers a spot that can really do it.
And now, you saw, if you actually take a look at last year's roster, Robert Hicks was listed, I believe, at 250 or 255. He's actually trimmed down to about 235 this year. So yeah. He's a guy that was close to transferring last year. And then he ended up staying. I believe he kind of explored his options elsewhere. Ended up staying after the staff had moved him to defensive end during the spring. So he's a guy who said, "No, I came here to play linebacker. I'm going to play linebacker in college." Basically, I would assume the conversation was like, "What do I need to do?" And part of that was that he just wasn't fast enough to play in their system. So you didn't see a lot last season.
That's such a great point. I think that goes to the buy-in, the guys believing in the system and doing what it takes to get on the field. Because he's been 250 since he was a junior in high school. I mean, he's always been a bigger guy. Mm-hmm. I'll be, again, honest. Same with Chandler Jones. I wasn't really high on him as a recruit, even though they were both Under Armour All-Americans. They just didn't really seem to have a fit for what they were doing. Robert Hicks seemed like more of a defensive end to me. And when they moved him down to defensive end, I was like, great. And he wanted to transfer. I don't knock him at all. He made a decision, but I think they gave him, this is what you need to do, and he got there. And I love seeing him at 235 because that's where they want their guys. You got to be able to run. It sounds so simple, but if you can't run, you can't play on this team. And if he's trimmed down, that should speed him up a little bit. That should help him. I've seen him play in coverage. He can do all the things they want him to do. He's just not fast enough. So if he can speed up a little bit, that's another guy that they can put on the field. Dorian Jones is another guy that can come on the field. And now you have guys that if CJ Avery or Dorian Etheridge need a break, the coaches might feel comfortable saying, hey, we've got two guys out there that we feel good with. That's on top of Monty Montgomery. So you got three guys that you can put out there at middle linebacker to give those guys a break, and that's what they're looking for.
Absolutely. And the last thing I would say to add to your kind of depth point as well would be, if you look at the games that Louisville performed best on defense last season, everybody was shocked by the performance of against Notre Dame. Well, they were completely, fresh and healthy in that game. Second game of the season, they pitched a shutout, and then it kind of progressively got worse and worse as the season went on. By the time you play Miami and Kentucky, it was just an absolute shellacking. But then they get rested up, play a pretty talented Mississippi State team, and they put together one of their better performances of the season. So to your point, when they were well rested, when they were able to keep the starting players, more talented guys on the field more often, then they were ultimately more successful. So, yep. But by the same token, if they can continue to develop this depth at every position like they are right now, then eventually you'll be able to see the staff be able to implement what they want to do on defense successfully.
Mm-hmm. Now, one of the things I kind of want to mention that, two individuals I don't want to kind of three individuals I don't want to overlook is Thurman Gathers, Marvin Dallas, who is the junior college commit from last season, and Yasir Abdullah, which I think one of you all mentioned. But I believe Thurman Gathers actually played last season as a freshman, a redshirt freshman. I'm really excited to see what Marvin Dallas can bring to the table. But outside of that, the official linebacker core has a lot more depth.
Yeah.
There is going to be a giant leap, I believe, in defensive tackles, forced fumbles, hopefully interceptions.
So to touch on that a little bit, kind of go back to the whole point of being able to do different things. One thing they did with Gathers last year when he played, he was a third down rusher. They put him in to rush the passer on third downs in the handful of games that he played. And then you have a guy like Marvin Dallas who played corner at JUCO, moved to outside linebacker for his second year at JUCO, but he has experience in coverage. So now you have guys that shows that versatility they're looking for. You know, a guy that like Gathers who can be a guy that put his hand in the ground on third down and say, hey, we're going to put you at outside linebacker just to rush the passer. And eventually, as he gets older, as it grows, as he gets the defense down, now he can maybe move into a more permanent or more concrete role. But when you have guys that at least you can put them in situationally, and this is your role for now as a young guy, as a guy that's not really at the top of the depth chart. Like I said, that's all kind of part of the plan. And you're seeing it with their recruiting class coming up too. They really want that position versatility or situational versatility, and I think they're building on that right now.
Yeah, no, most definitely. Now, the next group we move up to is defensive line. Now, one thing I want to mention is that if you all remember that Coach Brown was actually using the defense as we talked about, switching guys in and out, doing some interesting plays, and one of which I found very interesting was where he was taking that front three and he was having them do almost this switching around. I think it was on like third down and long, and he would just have the defensive line just going back and forth, crossing each other consistently until the snap of the ball. I found that very interesting, and it worked a handful of times.
So they call that the amoeba defense.
The amoeba. Okay.
So and I love it. I noticed it when I was watching their App State games, and it made me all giddy because Charlie Strong actually did that a lot during his final year here when he had, all those, first, second, third round picks, and he would just do whatever. He was kind of playing around with people, it always seemed like. And the goal there is obviously to confuse the offense and move guys around, and when they snap it, you just go. And it makes it really hard to figure out who you're supposed to block. Another one of those things, I guess I keep kind of beat the dead horse, but another one of those things that they weren't able to do as much as they wanted, and I think we're going to see more of that type of stuff. The creativity, the different guys coming in and doing different stuff, we just didn't really see it all the time, and I think that was something that when I watched App State games, they did that, I don't want to say regularly, but it was pretty often that you would see him throw that out on third and longs and things like that. And it's just part of the creativity that Brian Brown brings to the table that I don't think we really got to see. Mm-hmm. And I think the defensive line, it was the least deep area they had last year. I think there was a real issue. Like I said, I already pointed out that Gigi Robinson was a third down rusher when that's not at all what his game is. This year we should be able to see guys like Jadarian Boykin be on the field more. He's a guy that's already up to 250 pounds. He looks like a physical freak, on all these videos he's posting on his Twitter account. You've got guys like Zach Edwards, who redshirted last year. He was a linebacker that they moved down to defensive line last year to help with depth. He played a little bit, made a couple plays in a little bit of time he had. So you have guys like that can rush the passer. Yaya Diaby should be a guy that we see rush the passer. And then you have the guys like Dana Kennard, Jared Goldwire, and Tiberius Peterson, who are more of probably your starters who will be better against the run. Dana Kennard's up to 270 pounds. He'll probably be up to about 275. Peterson's up to about 265. And Jared Goldwire is over 300 now. So you have size now at the top of your defensive line. An issue they didn't have last year. It had Amante Gaban, who's a former linebacker, Tiberius Peterson, who's a former linebacker. Those guys didn't really have the requisite girth to be able to handle the whole season. And like I said, that's when you look at these guys, they've got to handle nonstop all year long, being the guys on the field nonstop. So between those guys being able to grow a little bit, get a little more girth, and having more depth behind them, guys that can come in and spell them, I think we should really see an improvement on the defensive line. This is the hill I'm willing to die on this offseason, is that the defensive line is going to be much better than it was last year.
No, I concur completely. And just Yaya Diaby, I honestly, I'm super excited about him.
Yeah,
and
really
I did not realize that. Now, you said Jared Goldwire has exceeded 300.
Yeah.
I mean, you're right. Exactly. Is the fact that there was not a whole lot of weight on the defensive line, when that was clearly shown during the UK game. I mean, if you look against the UK O-line versus our D-line, it almost looked like, I mean, we were, outsized. It almost was, it was a little ridiculous in my opinion. But Jadarian Boykin coming in, Henry Bryant, Jared Dawson, and Desmond Tell being the freshman. I believe Desmond's been posting a ton of videos. He's been gaining a lot of weight. He's been, just working on, I do not know what the exercise is where you jump from different blocks to block. You got to jump a certain height. He's been working on the offseason. He's been posting on Twitter. But for the most part, Malik Clark, let's see, who else did we not touch? Let's see, Henry Bryant, Jared Dawson, and Desmond Tell. I believe there's going to be a lot of freshmen playing, and I've been saying this consistently through this show, is that, there's going to be depth, and there's going to be a lot of freshmen playing now. There may be some freshmen who step up, kind of like how you mentioned that Zach Edwards played last year. Mm-hmm. And he was very productive, and he was great at the pass rush. But for the most part, I'm just glad to see some depth on the defensive line, as opposed to last year where it was a mess, complete mess.
Yeah, if you look at guys like, Derek Dorsey was not a super highly recruited guy coming out of high school. He's a manual product that has had to play a lot more than I think a lot of people expected. Obviously, Dana Kennard was a former walk-on. So there are a lot of guys that really help to fill a lot of those holes. This year, those guys might play a little bit less with the addition of Diaby, with the addition of Jadarian Boykin. And then it'll all come down really on the defensive line as well to who ends up panning out as a freshman. I know we talked about Zach Edwards played a few snaps last season, but up the middle, I'm interested to see who kind of wins that backup battle between Henry Bryant and Jared Dawson. If one of those guys can really stand out and be a true, like we spoke about at linebacker, if Goldwire can come off the field and you can put in Bryant or Dawson and they're able to kind of fill the void without having any fall off, then that's when you really start developing that great depth. And that's when you can, if Goldwire's playing, say, 45 or 50 snaps at 6'6", 305 pounds versus playing 70 to 80 snaps, that's a huge difference.
That's huge, yeah.
So to be able to get him off the field and maybe even only play, 2 or 3 snaps a possession would be massive.
Yeah.
For especially for a guy up the middle on the defensive line, like, he's not going to be breaking out into the open field very often. He's going to be taking a beating over and over again. So, it'll be interesting to see what happens on the defensive line. But overall, I'm interested to see when they have depth on the defensive line, how that affects the rest of the defense. If they're able to get pressure on the quarterback, if they're able to get into the backfield and actually get some push against opposing offensive lines, then all of a sudden, then that frees things up for the secondary to be a little bit more aggressive.
Yes.
If you have quarterbacks like we saw last year, I mean, you saw a quarterback from Miami who, most of their fan base, were not huge fans of. He wasn't very highly thought of, and I believe he had 6 touchdown passes. He just kind of stood in the backfield and had a career game. That's something that Louisville cannot allow to happen. I don't think that's something that will continue to happen as they develop that depth.
Mm-hmm. I feel like we're sharing a brain right here. Like everything there. I was like, oh yeah, exactly. And the pass rush is it's an underrated aspect of the secondary. Those guys are not going to play well no matter what if you can't get after the quarterback. And that was a huge issue for Louisville last year. That's part of the reason where you see you talk about Marlon Carrick or Anthony Johnson kind of getting beat. Well, some of those times they're getting beat, they're trying to run with guys for 6 seconds, 7 seconds. You need guys that can rush the passer. And I do think, kind of going back to the situational stuff, where you maybe have Jared Goldwire and Malik Clark as those defensive tackles that are your run guys, that you want them in there to stuff the run. And on third downs, maybe that is where we see Henry Bryant, who's a smaller, quicker, more disruptive guy that can maybe get after the passer. And Jared Dawson the same way. Maybe you put those young guys in there. And, obviously you have Boykin, Diaby, and Edwards and Peterson, who are faster, quicker guys off the edge. Monty Montgomery as a pass rusher on third downs off the edge like they used last year. Options. And that's
Right.
the big thing that they're going to be able to do now is going into game one, they're going to have a better understanding of who they have. But more than that, they're going to have a plan of, okay, we know that in these situations, this is your package you're putting in. And last year they had the money package. That's what they called their third down dime package. Well, in that, you didn't have a single true pass rusher.
Right.
So what's the point? On third downs, if you don't have a guy that you can rely on to be, hey, we know this guy is going to push the quarterback and cause some disruption there, it's kind of a waste. So being able to have maybe 3 guys on the field that you feel comfortable that can get after the quarterback, that's going to help the secondary. And like I said, it's just like with Chandler Jones being able to take away maybe some areas, it helps the entire defense. And it's hard not to get excited about because there's so much potential there. It's so young. They still don't have a lot of experience, and there's still a lot of unknown with it. But they're in much better shape than they were last year. At least there's the potential. There was no real potential there last year.
Yeah, and one more thing to add to your point about overall pass rush, and it's a situational thing too. So, for instance, if you go back and look at the Clemson game, I don't think they did a terrible job against Clemson on the defensive end overall. But if you just watch Clemson's offensive line versus our defensive line every single play, they can just by default have a 3 or 4 yard running play just by running up the middle because our defensive line gets pushed backwards every single play. So if you, by the time you get to the third or fourth quarter, Travis Etienne's going to have a 7 yards per carry because we have the same guys on the field every single play. So we're not even to the point at that point to worrying about a pass rush, worry about clogging up the lanes for a running back. We're more worried about just not getting pushed backwards. Yeah. So when you have that depth and when you have these guys rotating in and out, all of a sudden Jared Goldwire is going to be able to hold his own in the middle of the fourth quarter in an important game versus being tired by halftime. So the more that you develop that depth, especially for a lot of these bigger guys, like I'm I'm not a bigger guy, and I feel like I'd be exhausted by the middle of the third quarter. So that continuing to develop that depth is just going to continue to feed off itself, not just at that specific position, but overall on defense.
Mm-hmm. No, exactly. And having this year two returning coaches is really going to help. I mean, we haven't had this in almost 4 to 5 years. Mm-hmm. Actually returning defensive coordinator. Now, Dale Jones did leave. Now he went back to App State to be, I think, the defensive coordinator for App State.
Yeah.
But honestly, filling him in with Derek Nicholson, I believe, was a great choice. Him being from Florida State, understanding what's required in the ACC, especially with bigger guys, and coming from, I believe, the AAC as a recruiter. He was one of the best recruiters, mm-hmm. All right, in the AAC. And I'm honestly excited to see what he can do over the next couple of years, especially being able to build these guys up, get them stronger, faster.
So I think one big thing with him, I think from a recruiting standpoint, personally, I think it's an upgrade. I can't speak for coaching on the field because we're not in practices, we're not in the locker room. But from a recruiting standpoint, he has a better footprint. He's got Northern Florida, Southern Georgia, and Louisiana. Those are 3 areas that you're going to find a bunch of talent. And getting into Louisiana and being able to hopefully, keep treading there. They got Greedy Vance last year. They're in on a couple guys this year that I don't think they're going to get, but they're at least in on those guys. Expanding their footprint from a recruiting standpoint down in Louisiana. They're into Texas also. They're getting on the West Coast, at least for quarterbacks, with Frank Ponce having I think he has some connections out in Arizona from my understanding. being able to expand that is a really big plus, and having a 33-year-old coach come in that can really connect with younger players. It's no knock on Dale Jones. Dale Jones is a legend, especially in Tennessee where he played. He was at App State for 25 years, and part of the reason why he went back, his family's still there. So it's understandable why he went there, and he's not a bad coach or anything like that. But from a recruiting standpoint, younger coaches it's always just better. It's just the way it goes. So I think they upgraded from a recruiting standpoint. I think he fits what they're doing on defense. He has a relationship with Brian Brown and Shadon Brown. I think that's always a plus too. So I'm excited to have. If you're going to lose a guy, I feel like they probably upgraded at least in one aspect from a recruiting standpoint, and that's a huge plus. And I think not just bringing a defensive coordinator back, bringing those position coaches back is huge. When you're going to practice and you're doing the same things every single day, and you know what to expect every single day, and your coach knows what to expect, that's a plus. It's a huge plus to just go to practice. You know exactly what you're doing, and then being able to communicate when you're coming on and off the field, knowing that, hey, you're doing this, you're doing that, and when you can talk to your coach, you have that better relationship. I think that's going to be a big thing. And Brian Brown pointed that out to Nicole Auerbach of the Athletic. She did a state of the program thing, that their series that they're doing, and Brian Brown made it a point. He said one of the huge issues they had last year was guys were coming off the field and they couldn't tell me what they saw. And that's to kind of put that in context. When you come off the field on third down or after a big play or whatever it may be, you've got to be able to tell your defense coordinator, like, hey, here's what happened, and that's why this went wrong. Or when it went positive, here's what happened, here's what they're doing. That communication, because the coaches can only see so much. Well, when you're coming off the field and you don't know what to tell the coach, like, I don't know, man, he showed up behind me and I don't even know what happened. That's not helping anybody. You're not going to be able to adjust to that until the game is over. You guys watch film the next day, and Brian Brown is looking at you like, what in the world were you doing? And you're like, well, I can see it now because I can watch it on film. Well, after a year of it, and you know what you're doing every single day, you start seeing things a lot better. And when you come off the field, you can tell your coach, hey, here's what happened. So and so, missed their fit, and that's why that guy ended up running on the field. Next time out, okay, we know what we did wrong. You can adjust on the fly. So that's part of the reason why the defense has continuously gotten worse. Because every year they got a new guy that they're talking to, and they can't fix anything when the game's going on. So right. I think that's something that's going to be another one of those things I'm really excited about, is that they're going to have a lot better communication, and we shouldn't see things progressively getting worse throughout the game. They should be able to fix things on the fly a little bit better.
So the way I think about it is, like, if you've ever switched from one job that you did for a long time to another, right? When you first go into that job, you have to learn all this new terminology. And so, like, just making something up, like, say you start a new job and they're like, oh yeah, if you want to get that paper filed, you need to go to the CBD and then talk to the TLC. And you're like, okay, well, where do I find that? And you're like, oh, in room 242. Like, all that stuff, like, you have no idea what that means. Like, I know it sounds silly, but like, if you've ever changed companies, every company has different phrasing and terminology, right? And so if you were switching a company every single year and getting all that terminology confused, so then all of a sudden, I feel like there's going to be such a big leap from year one to year two, because this is the first time that we've seen, it's been at least 4 to 5 years, the first time that we've seen continuity on that coaching staff. And then going back to kind of replacing Dale Jones, Alex and I were talking on our podcast earlier this week about, what's going to happen when Satterfield starts losing all these great coaches. Because eventually it seems like the writing's on the wall. It's going to happen at some point. There's going to be coaching turnover. When you have good coaches, people are going to try to take them away from you, right? And so my initial reaction was like, yeah, I don't know. That remains to be seen. And then I was like, well, they did just replace the oldest coach with at a position coach with a defensive coordinator from a different school who happens to be one of the best recruiters in his conference, and he's also going to be one of the youngest coaches now. So so far so good as far as transferring, transitioning from one position coach to the other. As the bigger names start to roll in, then we'll see how that transition goes. But no, it's encouraging to see that Coach Satterfield is such a respected coach that there are a lot of guys who would love to come play for him. And not only that, make a jump from, say, like a defensive coordinator position or a co-defensive coordinator positions like a linebackers coach or a recruiting coordinator or something like that.
And another point on Nicholson that I really love, Cam T did a story on Nicholson and kind of how he ended up here. And one thing I loved is that he wasn't looking for a job. Satterfield went and found him, which I thought was really great. He has some ties here, but Satterfield doesn't have, and not from when Satterfield was here, obviously. So I love the fact that it's not that, hey, we need a coach. A bunch of guys reached out, and I just picked one because, hey, whatever. Yeah. They found what he felt was the best guy for the job, and I love the way they interviewed. They described how the interview was. It's just the whole staff in a room, just talking. It was kind of loose, laid back. It was kind of how the staff does things, in a sense of, they have these pickup basketball games. They do these, oddball, like, cornhole tournaments and all that stuff like that. It's just, it's different. And I think that's something that people want to be a part of. And I think that's what's going to help down the road, to your point of how they replace guys. Guys are going to want to be a part of the staff, that you're a coach as your profession, not as your entire life. Right. And that was a huge thing, when you go from the previous staff and how they go about things, it was flipped. Coaching's your life. Everything else comes second. And Satterfield's been known to allow his coaches to bring their families to the facility. I had coaches that had their kids in the same daycare as mine, and there's nothing weirder than looking up out of nowhere and seeing one of the coaches walk past you, and you're like, this is the middle of the day. I know there's practice in like an hour, and these guys are picking up their kids from school. It's important. It's an important factor for Satterfield to have those guys have that family mentality. I think he's going to attract a lot of high talented guys that and he'll be able to go out and find guys. That still just stands out to me, because everyone would want a potentially better job. But for them to pass up maybe on those guys looking for a job and say, hey, this is the guy we feel is best for it, I thought that was really important.
Now, one of the things I did want to say that I was incorrect on was I did say the AAC conference. Actually, Coach Nicholson is from the Conference USA. That was on me. I kind of dropped the ball on that.
They get a little confusing for a while.
Yeah. But for the most part, there is one last thing that I kind of want to do is look at the recruiting. All right, look how Louisville's doing for this 2021 class recruiting. If you guys want to take a second and kind of get that up on your screen real fast. No worries about that unless you have it memorized.
I've been looking at this stuff so much that it's like in my head right now. It's insane.
Yeah, Keith's an encyclopedia for this stuff, man.
I don't have anything else to do. I mean, it's like, all right, there's nothing but recruiting to talk about, so this is all I've been doing lately.
No, yeah. I mean, honestly, that's great. I love listening to you guys and talking to you guys about this. You're just a plethora of knowledge. The Amoeba defense, I didn't even know that's what it was called, and I'm sure a lot of the fans are going to be thankful for that.
Fun, man. My favorite thing. It's one of my favorite things in football. I love it.
I'm telling you should do a class on it. Just do like an open class on positions and different play styles and all that. But okay, so we're going to look at the 2021 recruiting class. And one of the first players is the 4-star Benjamin Perry out of Chicago, Illinois. He's a 4-star recruit coming in, and his position is safety. Honestly, I thought this was a big get immediately from the coaching staff, even before he got that jump in the 24/7 composite rating. But overall, I think he's going to be an immediate starter potentially next year.
Now, I can totally see. Ben Perry is if you're looking for, if anybody wants to know, hey, what does the staff really kind of go for? What are the traits they're looking for? Ben Perry is it as a defensive player. 6'3". I think he's about 185, 190 now. He'll be about 215, 220 when he gets to Louisville and gets in the weight room and whatnot. He has this big, giant frame. That's really what they're looking for from a physical standpoint. Do you have the long arms, the long limbs? Will you be able to add muscle mass and still keep your athleticism? And Ben Perry's the guy they're going to look at to play guard, like Rajay Burns, like Trinell Troutman and whatnot. And I think he's going to be a guy that comes in and immediately pushes for playing time. I think he definitely could be a starter if things work out. If he has that potential. Plays the pass really well, so that'll be helpful because those guys at that guard position do go out and cover your slot receivers, your tight ends, and then he has that positional versatility. If they want to put the nickel package out there, he can stay on the field and go out and play corner. He can slide back to safety. So, or he can be a rush in off the edge like Monty Montgomery, like we saw last year. That's exactly what they want. I think that ratings bump he got was well overdue. I think that rivals will probably follow suit. He'll be one of the bigger recruits they've had recently. I think he's great. I think he's an unbelievable player.
Yeah, and I think what should excite fans too is that you have two guys that are pretty similar in that regard, in Ben Perry and Braylon Oliver. And they made it a point, the staff made it a point to go out and say, these are our guys, these are the guys that we're going after, and we need you guys right away. So they're going to lose a couple of guys at safety next season. So they're gonna be immediate impact players going into next season. And you could kind of equate it. I know Louisville's a basketball town too. You could kind of equate it to like a modern day basketball recruiting for guys like Oliver and Perry, and that the more positions that they can play, the more that they can do with the team all over the field. So when you look at a guy like, for instance, like what everybody loves Dwayne Sutton on the basketball team, right? Because he's a guy that played position, the 3 through 5, and he can do everything. It's going to be similar with Ben Perry being, multifaceted on defense. So yeah, that's a guy that everybody should be extremely excited about. Obviously, he gets a lot of comparisons to the guy that just came out of Clemson. What was that guy's name again? Ben Simmons, yeah, right. Not Ben Simmons, Isaiah Simmons. I apologize.
Oh,
yeah.
Now, the next on defense for recruiting wise is Victone Brown. I actually had a chance to sit down and talk to Victone, and he was a great kid. And honestly, he's excited. He's been the not the front runner. What would you call it? He is basically trying to talk to these other commits and trying to pull them into Louisville. And honestly, he's been doing a great job, and the fan base is seeing it. And being able to build that kind of family-oriented style right off the bat is just amazing. Now he stands at about 6'4", 227 pounds, and he's a 3-star out of the 24/7 composite, and he is a strong defensive end player. I can honestly see him being an immediate impact next season.
Yeah, I think he's a guy that can step in that role of a defensive end on first and second down as a run stopper kind of guy. But I think that the big positive is that he's going to be a guy that can play all 3 downs. He can rush the passer well. He's not gonna have to come off the field on third downs, which is ultimately the goal. As much as we talk about situational things with the defensive front, if you can have guys that can play all 3 downs, and that's better for everybody. So I think he's a guy that's gonna get up to about 260, 265. That's around where they want their defensive end, so they can kind of do a little, like I said, do a little bit of both. I think he's so big and long. I think you're gonna have a hard time not getting him up to 270, 280. Honestly, he's a massive kid. I actually watched this film again yesterday because, like I said, I'm bored. I don't have anything else to do, so I watched him again because I hadn't really watched him since he first committed. And lately, they've had so many commits I haven't actually been able to go back. But I think he's a high ceiling guy. He still hasn't even reached his potential. He's still a little bit raw. He plays. The motor and energy is taking him where he is right now. Once he gets to the point where he starts getting more moves in his repertoire, when he starts understanding pad level and hand placement, I think he's got a really high ceiling because, like I said, he's just going on pure athleticism right now. So I'm really excited about him, but I think he has the potential to be more than just a first, second down guy because he does have some potential to be a pass rusher too.
Yeah, so Louisville actually got 4 defensive end commits, I think, in like 9 days or something crazy like that. So they're kind of going ham. These defensive ends were like ready to get in and reserve their spots on the defense. But Brown is going to be the guy that's not the developmental guy, right? He's going to be kind of the centerpiece of this defensive line class. And if you guys haven't gotten a chance to check out his interview yet with Jonathan, he actually gave a pretty good interview. He was pretty entertaining to listen to. as well. He gave some pretty funny answers. So.
Oh yeah.
So I think Perry Brown and Oliver are going to be three guys that are going to be the next task for the staff is just going to be hanging on to them, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we've heard a lot about a lot of players potentially flipping to Louisville, or a lot of players, being wishy-washy because they haven't gotten a chance to step foot on campus. Well, a lot of these guys still haven't taken all their official visits yet. So what I'm most interested in seeing, I think we're going to get a few more commits that are up there that are like Ben Perry status as far as like where they're ranked, which ultimately at the end of the day doesn't matter. It's what they do on the field when they're in college, right? But if we want to talk about recruiting class rankings and what that entails, holding on to Perry Brown and Oliver is going to be a really, really big deal over the next, whatever it is, the next year or so.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, essentially, I feel like the recruiting class is going to get better consistently each year, especially Louisville this season should exceed 8-5 personally. Now, Keith and I actually discussed and we broke down the Louisville schedule about a week or two ago. And Keith, you actually had mentioned that Louisville was going to beat Notre Dame. And we actually kind of talked about it. Now, the potential is they may have one loss the entire season, which is something that we haven't heard in a very long time, probably since I believe it was Lamar Jackson's sophomore year, and then what was it, Teddy Bridgewater's senior year? That we almost went an entire season without losing. Now they did lose a couple of those games, but for the most part, you're right. We're going to have, I believe, 19 graduates next year. So a lot of these kids who are going to come in, I believe we're still going to have about a 25 commit class for 2020 and then 2021 and 2022 until defensive depth can be refilled and we can get a lot more suited guys at these positions. Now,
I think this is, they're going to have a full class and it's going to be defense heavy. But, I think that, as of right now, you look at where they are with 10 players in the class, in my opinion, at least, I think they've already they're at like the bottom of their class is probably there. I think that most of the guys are going to be adding are going to be at least in the middle of the class, if not higher rated than what they already have in the class, at least in some areas. So there's definitely a strong potential. I agree with Presley, though, that they've got to keep recruiting these guys. Ben Perry has been honest and said that, hey, when I can take visits, he's going to take his visits. Doesn't necessarily mean he's going to flip, but he's going to take visits. And as we saw with Chuba Purdy last year, he took one visit outside of Louisville and flipped out of nowhere after being completely, on board. I'm not as – I think that, these guys are young. They're teenagers. Victone Brown has said, hey, I'm 100%. I'm all, bought into to Louisville. Who knows what happens if he, he can take visits, he might change his mind. So it's tough. It's hard, but that's part of coaching. That's part of recruiting. And that's one thing that I hope that going forward, I hope we see Louisville be more on the Clemson end, where Clemson had their first decommit this recruiting period, and it was the first time in like 6 years they had anybody decommit. Hopefully it gets to that point, and part of that is being selective. And when you recruit guys and you take their commitment, it's kind of a binding. Hey, we only want you for this spot. They're not there. I think they'll get there if they can hopefully keep everybody here and whatnot, where they're more selective. But it's an oddball recruiting cycle. I think I saw yesterday there's 780 kids that are committed. Last year this time it was like 360 or something like that. So it's an odd time. Guys are not going to be able to visit at least until September now. That might go into even later. And then once you're talking into the season, you've got kids also doing their own football. It's a lot harder to visit in the fall because you can only really do it on the weekend. So I think what we'll see is a lot of kids are going to wait to sign until the second signing period, like they used to have to do. And that just means that's 3 more months that you got to hold on to or 2 more months. It's just going to be an odd time, but one thing that I do feel good about is this coaching staff is really good from a communication standpoint. You see them still sending out these edits to the players that are in the class, and those kids love that stuff. They're still talking to them on the phone every day. Yeah, I feel good about that compared to maybe, hey, this guy's in our class, we don't have to worry about him. You don't want
Mhm.
that, because that's when kids feel like they're not wanted anymore, and you got other coaches saying, hey, man, they're talking to them every day. So I think that's a plus. Louisville has a staff that's more that's what they're good at. As apparently is the talking, the communication, the video stuff. They seem to be really good at it, and that's why they're where they are now. And like I said, I think the class is only going to get better.
Oh yes, I mean if you look at Vic Mullen, he's a tight end out of Ottawa, Illinois. Now this is kind of flipping over to offense real fast, but one of the things I want to kind of talk about is the fact that Louisville can find those players who are not, really on the radar with a lot of schools. If I remember, Victor Mullen, he actually had a lot of, I think, D3. He had, I think, a couple, maybe one or two Ivy League schools coming after him. And he, on 24/7 Sports, he has a 3-star, 86 composite, by them. And honestly, he was almost an unknown player, really.
Yeah, he's pretty under the radar, and I think that they've been really good about one thing with Louisville is they have a plan. They know exactly what they want at every position. There's not a hey, this guy might be this or this guy. It's hey, we know we want a guy that is around this height. We want him around this weight. They want him to be able to show this on film. And that was one of the reasons why last year, I know there was and some fair complaints about the recruiting class last year about some of the guys not having big offers and this, that, and the other. Most of the guys they got in that class last year, they saw all those players in person on Louisville's campus and got to evaluate them with their own eyeballs. That's all they care about.
Mhm.
There's no, well, this school recruited him, or hey, this coach that I know thinks that he's good, or hey, the recruiting. They don't care about any of that stuff, and they just want to see this guy and say this guy fits what we want to do, and they'll take that guy. And that was one of the things that last year we saw. This year, the positive is that they have something better to sell. They have the rebuild that they did in 1 year, and you see it. If you read these recruits and how they when they interview, all of them are saying the same thing. Like, I was really impressed with what they did in the first year. I want to be a part of that, and that's what the coaches are selling. And now you can sell that on top of your evaluation that hey, we want this guy. And Vic Mullen's a perfect example. He's a little bit raw, but you see what he does on the field. He can block really well. When he gets down the field, he has really good hands, and sometimes that's it. That's what they want out of a tight end. You got to be able to block in this offense. We know that with the way they run the ball. We saw what Ian Pfeiffer could do last year. We saw what Marshawn Ford can do. You got to be able to block, and that's what they're looking for first. And hey, you can catch the football and run. Hey, that's what they wanted, and it doesn't matter they didn't have great offers. And to touch on the Ivy League factor, I guess I kind of wanted to point this out with Ben Perry. They love the academic aspect, the football IQ, all of that. That's a big thing to this football staff. And Satterfield has said it God knows how many times, but coaches say things all the time, and you just think, yeah, whatever, he's just saying this. They're going after guys with big Ivy League offers, Stanford offers, Duke offers, Vanderbilt. They want guys that can do the stuff off the field, but that translates to football. You have football IQ, obviously, but usually guys that do really well in school work really hard too,
Mhm.
and they want hard workers. So I think that's a big part of it also. And you see that with Vic Mullen, you see that with Ben Perry, and a lot of guys are offering and they're targeting. You can find really good football players that are also really smart, and I think that's what they really want.
Yeah, and
Now,
what I was going to say, I'm sorry, a lot
no,
of what
you're
you
good.
see with guys like Vic Mullen is Vic Mullen plays kind of in the middle of nowhere in Illinois. A lot of people haven't heard about, Ottawa, Illinois, right? I think that's where he's from.
Yeah.
And it's like 2 hours south of Chicago, I think. I had to look it up when he committed because I was interested. And I was watching him on film, and it's comical how he just mows over all these other players. Like, he's so good in the blocking game, and it's also because the players that he's playing against are like my size, right?
Mm-hmm.
So he's literally out there just mowing over dudes. I think he's like 6'6", 250, 260. But regardless, speaking to what you were saying, Keith, I think that the coaching staff really just wants to meet some of these players, shake their hands, look them in the eye, and see what kind of character they have. They're not recruiting, guys just based off talent alone. Like, they want guys who it's going to translate in the classroom, on the field. and overall contribute to having a positive and successful locker room atmosphere, not just the playing side of things. And so Vic Mullen is one of those guys that fits that mold perfectly.
Now, one of the things I did want to mention I was mistaken again. I said Ivy League schools, but he had a couple from, let's see, Miami, Ohio, NIU, and there was one other, I believe it was Central Michigan.
Oh, you had a Dartmouth offer. I'm probably thinking of somebody else, but.
Well, for the most part, I thought it was Ivy League, but I mean, there were pretty good schools. He got offered for Appalachian State, and Iowa, UCF was one of them as well, and for the most part, Illinois State and Syracuse. But yeah, no, he's a talented player, and like you were saying, Presley, is the fact that he was mowing down guys. I saw some of that his highlight footage as well, and like it was, like you said, comical just watching him knock over these kids just flawlessly. And I think honestly, that's going to be something that he may have a little bit trouble in, coming off of being a freshman into a college situation. But I mean, if he gets more weight and he gets better at speed, I'm sure that he has potential to just do the same thing.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. I mean, and if you take a look at a lot of these top name recruit offer lists, like to me, when we were talking about this, I just pulled up Braylon Oliver because I remembered he had a great offer list. If you go down the list, he has Georgia, Duke, Florida State, Georgia Tech, NC State, Oklahoma, Tennessee. Now, obviously, we can get into the whole committable offer conversation. That's a completely different story, right? A lot of coaches will extend an olive branch and say, hey, we're going to offer you a scholarship. Well, we want to wait till, we want to make sure we get your measurables and make sure, we're waiting until down the road, which is like kind of a nice way of saying, like, we want to offer you, but there might be some bigger fish to fry first out there. So, not regardless, though, you're seeing a lot of these players, big name schools, successful schools like Georgia, like Tennessee, like Florida, big name SEC schools are offering. And they also have some of these other ones mixed in, like, the Northwesterns, the Dukes, the Dartmouths. So a lot of these players have the mental aptitude in the classroom. And like he said, if you have the work ethic to get all A's and B's in the classroom, then you're definitely going to have what it takes on the field, getting into a playbook. And it also shows as well that they're making the effort outside of football to make sure that they're more well-rounded people, which to me would indicate that they're not out getting into a bunch of trouble. They're truly focused on what their future looks like, which is important.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, no, Braylon Oliver, honestly, I was surprised that he had such big offers from, other Power 5 schools, Georgia, I think you said Florida State as well, who is in the ACC, but still, all right, so one of the last couple defensive commits that we've had recently that you talked about a little bit, Keith, was Rance Connor, who's a cornerback. He's out of Miami, Florida. He's a 3-star prospect on 24/7 Sports, and he stands at 5'10", 173 pounds. And honestly, I mean, like, he has great film. And just the fact that he committed was a shocker to everybody.
Yeah, I think that I don't think anybody saw it coming. Apparently, he just woke up that morning and called Coach Satterfield and said, I want to commit. I don't think that – I literally don't think that he told anybody. And I don't even think the staff knew before that day that he was going to commit. So I thought that was really funny because I think I saw the tweet and I was actually like some of these when I see them coming, I try to do a pre-write and get it up ready to go so I don't have to try to put a story together really quick. And I was like, Jesus Christ, man! I was like, it's Friday afternoon, like. I'm like, I'm busy. So it completely caught me off guard. And from my understanding, it caught everybody off guard. But I think that, like I said, we talk about these kind of these traits, I guess, or specific things that they're looking for in a player. And another guy that is an absolute ball hawk. I mean, he goes after the football. He has great hands. And one of the things I love to watch this game was that he can play man coverage. He can play zone coverage. And he can play them both very well. So Louisville plays a lot of man, but they'll play some zone here and there. They'll play some cover 2 and, Tampa 2. And your corners have to be able to do a little bit of everything. But more than anything, you got to be able to play the football. And I think if off the top of my head, I want to say he had 7 interceptions last year, doing it all different ways. And he's not a burner. He's not a super fast kid, but he gets himself in the right spots, and he has ball skills. He plays the ball like a receiver, which is what you want. So, none of these guys, you're not going to find finished products in high school, especially as a junior. But you're looking for those traits, those things that these guys can do well that will translate. And him playing the football is when he gets to Louisville, I don't think there'll be any issue from his standpoint when it comes to covering. He's got to get a little bit bigger. Everybody as a 16-year-old has to get bigger. But I really like his game. He's got some really nice offers, LSU, Florida State, and Florida off the top of my head, I think. And I think that anytime, you're 100% right on the whole committable offer and this and the other. But the way I look at it is if your coaches are looking at this kid even to the standpoint enough to say, hey, we're going to actually give you an offer and not just recruit you, that's enough for me. I mean, I think everything else becomes kind of people just, argument fodder, I guess, in my opinion. But yeah. I think he's a good player that will only improve. He's playing against really good competition down there in Florida. That just helps his game improve, and he'll be a better senior. And I think by the time he gets here, just like another thing I really like about Greedy Vance, he played at the highest level in Louisiana for the best team. You're getting pushed every day by the talent on your own team, let alone the guys you're playing against. And when you go against good talent every day, as they say, what do they say? Iron sharpens iron. That's just going to help you improve too. And I think that's going to help those guys when they get here. It's not going to be too much. They're not going to come in and go against Des Fitzpatrick and Tutu Atwell and those guys and be like, oh my God, I can't hang. Well, those guys played against 4-star receivers on their own team last year. So some of those little things I think are important. And I think that's something that really stands out about him is that he's going to be playing against some top level wide receivers down in South Florida.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think the last thing that I would add to Rance Connor's recruitment as well is that although we don't like it from a website standpoint from not being prepared for a commit, those are the kind of kids that you want to get, right? It's not a huge deal if they want to, have the Instagram live and announce that they're committing in 3 months and everybody, and have a countdown and a top 15 and a top 12 and a top 8 and whatever else. But it's nice to know that Rance Connor just said, hey, I want to play football at Louisville. I don't care if I tell everybody, I'm just going to be kind of on the DL about it and makes a commitment. Like those are the kind of guys that we should strive to get. Like he's not really there for the name on the back of the jersey. I know that sounds super corny, right? But like he wasn't all about the hype, and that's the kind of players that the coaching staff's going after.
Yeah. Now, one of the last 3 that we're going to talk about is RJ. So I'm not sure how to pronounce his last name.
Sorensen.
Okay, Sorensen. So the last 3 we're going to talk about. So the first one's going to be RJ Sorensen. Now, RJ was kind of surprised as well. Everyone wasn't really expecting him to go to Louisville. Mm-hmm. Let's see. I believe he had a lot of offers. I think everyone is really leaning towards Nebraska for a long time. They had Louisville not even up there, with Nebraska. But for the most part,
he was a Nebraska commit at one point and decommitted. And then I do think that there was a potential for him to still be able to get back in Nebraska's class. And I think the main thing that was really interesting about this kid is that he committed at 7:47, I think, in the morning.
Right.
I've never seen that before. I've been writing for Cardinal for like 10 years. I've never seen a kid commit before coaches even got to their office that day.
Right.
So I thought that was really funny because another kid that completely caught me off guard because he actually tweeted his commitment and deleted the tweet. And I was actually leaving for work that day, and I saw it, and I literally got up and I was like, all right, I gotta get to my computer and do the story real quick because I didn't see that coming. And then he deleted it, and I was like, just maybe he literally had it in his drafts and hit the wrong button.
Right.
I get in my car, I'm driving, my phone goes off, and I was like, Jesus Christ, man! Like he committed like 5 minutes later or something like that. So I thought that was hilarious. I've never seen that before. But another kid that to your point about Rance Connor, just a simple tweet. That was it. He didn't really do the whole, count, cutting his list. He didn't even announce that he was committing. He just tweeted out a simple tweet, and that was it. So I thought that was really interesting, especially for a defensive lineman. You want some of those guys to be I'm just here to work kind of guys. And his game is kind of that way too. He's a bigger kid. I think he can bulk up and maybe play defensive tackle, or potentially, like, situationally, be a guy that they put in as a defensive tackle on third downs. But he should be that strong side defensive end to play on that side, and he's a big kid. I like him. I'm not as high on him as some of the other guys, but I think that he serves a real potential role, and I think that's where it's a plus, because you got to get everybody. It's not just not everybody can be the superstar. You got to have the guys that can play the role too.
Yeah, and I think that Sorensen, of all the defensive linemen commits, he's kind of the tweener, right? So he's the guy that's already just naturally a really big dude. So I think that, if I recall correctly, I think a lot of the analysts projected him as a defensive end who could, like you said, kind of scoot into the defensive tackle role as well, need be. And obviously, we've seen in Brian Brown's defense just after 1 year that he doesn't mind utilizing some guys that are undersized. So, so that would definitely be interesting to see if he could be a situational defensive tackle as well. And it is interesting as well that Louisville's had some of these guys who just kind of, I assume we're going to talk about Raheem Craig a little bit here, but, a guy who literally his friend apparently stole his phone and tweeted that he was committing to Louisville like 10 days before he actually wanted to commit. So it is interesting. Recruiting is always interesting to watch because, we could be talking about these guys and half these guys not even come to U of L. So you really never know what's going to happen. So
yeah.
Yeah, no, Raheem Craig, he's an interesting character, and I really just cannot wait to see what he brings to the table. Especially being from Taylorsville, North Carolina. 6'3", 212 pounds. He's a little bit underweight from what it seems like, but I mean, honestly, he's about 16, 17 years old, so obviously, when he gets into his senior year, and obviously when he gets on campus, he's going to put on, like you guys said, about 20 to 30 pounds usually when these kids show up.
Yeah, it comes back to kind of the frame. These guys all have long limbs, broad shoulders, big chest. I mean, that's where you're going to put on the weight. And I think he's probably a guy they're going to want to be around 250 and kind of max out there because he's a rush in. He's not really a guy. I don't see him as a guy they're going to put in run situations, at least until he's in his maybe third year on campus, when they can really bulk him up and he really knows the defense and all that. But early on, to get on the field, he's a guy that they're going to want him rushing the passer, and he's really good at that. I mean, he put up 21 and a half tackles for loss, I think. I think he's in double-digit sacks as a junior last year. Doesn't play against unbelievable competition, but anyway you go, you put up those kind of numbers. I think he had 85 tackles or something like that as a defensive end. That's effort. You've got to be running down plays across the field from him. You got to be running down plays behind you. You get 85 tackles. Usually you're playing linebacker where, you're free to run and chase things down. You're going to have to be beating blocks to get to 85 tackles as a defensive end. So I think that no matter who you're playing against, that's definitely a good sign. And I think that he's the mentality aspect. He's a high motor guy, just wants to get out there and plays hard every play. And that's exactly what they're looking for on their defensive front. They want high motor guys because they're all about disruption up front. You're not always going to make the play. You're not always going to get the stats. You're not always going to make the tackle. But you've got to be willing to work hard and move people around and disrupt blockers so that someone else can make the play. And I think he's the kind of guy that has that mentality. So he's a developmental player. He's not going to play as a freshman, but I think he'll get on the field as a situational guy if he can, get a little bit more weight on him.
Yeah.
What interests me in watching all of these lower-rated defensive ends that kind of all committed one after the other is that they're all similar in the way that they finish plays, right? So you see a lot of these more talented guys coming out of high school. Not necessarily that it's not like a laziness or anything. It's just that they know that they can finish the play when they need to. Whereas you look at like a RJ Sorensen or Ryan Craig, right? Almost every single play that they make is kind of behind the play, right? So they have to kind of know what they're doing to use good footwork and get around the offensive tackle in order to finish the play. As far as like, I saw a lot on Raheem Craig's highlight tape where he was kind of chasing guys down, like you said, Keith, or it was kind of like where the quarterback was standing a little bit too long in the pocket and he was able to chase somebody down versus just, being you see a lot of these 4 and 5 star guys who are just beasts who just get into the backfield and finish off plays with authority, whereas he's more of like a chase down, hustle play kind of guy. And I think that's the same all across the board with Sorensen and with Craig and with Jalot as well.
Now, the last one we were going to talk about is Ashton Jalot. So what do you guys think about him? He's out of Raton, Florida. Oh, I'm sorry. Boca Raton. I'm sorry.
Right.
I was looking at the wrong line. Boca Raton, Florida. He's a 3-star prospect, comes in at 6'4", 220 pounds. Again, these kids, they're going to be able to put on some weight. And like you said, Keith, they may not start, their freshman year, but they're going to get in a couple plays. Obviously they're going to have to gain some weight. But for the most part, he's a weak defensive end player. And he has great film.
Yeah, I love that kid. He's probably going to end up being one of my favorite guys in the recruiting class. We talk about rankings a lot, and rankings. I'm a huge believer that stars matter. I'm not trying to debate that. One of the things when you're at Louisville's level, when you get about outside the top 10 or 12 teams in the rankings, stars don't really matter as much. You have to have a staff that can evaluate talent and go out there and get guys and then develop them. And that's where one thing that I think that Louisville, their staff does really well. I mean, we saw that at App State. They have guys that they put in the NFL this past season that, Darrington Evans and Omar Gaither-Thomas. That's not right. Gaither, I can't remember the second part of his last name. And they also have a bunch of guys that they signed as free agents. Those guys were all 2-star, 0-star guys that they found and developed. And all of them, one thing that's a trait with all of them is they can all run. And Ashton Jalot can run. And that's one thing that when you're starting at that base, that, hey, this guy can flat out, whether he's playing tight end on his film and you see him outrunning the defense, and he played at a decent level at Florida, playing against teams like Atlantic, where Henry Bryant played last year, and some of those other players. So he's not playing at the lowest level down there in Florida. I mean, you're playing at the lowest level. You're probably playing at a pretty high level at some other places. So he's a guy that I think is athletic, that they're going to be able to develop because he has a frame to put on a bunch of weight. He's got the speed, which you can't really teach, and he's got an insane motor. I mean, that guy plays so hard every single play that you don't have to teach him the hard parts of the game. Like, you don't have to worry about the things that you can't really, you have to pull that stuff out of most players. And when you're going and playing hard every single play like that to me shows that he's going to be able to develop with what they want to do. And then you throw in the fact that he's got the Duke offer, the Vandy, he's actually got the Dartmouth offer that I was thinking about earlier.
Mm-hmm.
That's where you say, okay, he's obviously got the mental capability to handle things, from a learning the game standpoint. And like I said, the work ethic is what stands out to me when you see those kind of offers. Those offers don't get given out to anybody. So you have to work to get to that point. So you don't have to worry about whether or not he wants to develop or he can do what they ask him to develop. I think he's a guy that 3 years from now, we're going to be looking back like, oh, wow, he was a second or third lowest player in the class. Javian Hawkins was the lowest player in his class. You go back to John Miller when we had Charlie Strong here, lowest rated player in his class. That's an NFL guy. Javian Hawkins is going to be an NFL player. The rankings matter, the ratings matter, but when you get to the point where Louisville's going to be recruiting in that hopefully top 25 range, but still not top 10, you really got to be able to find the guys that are towards the bottom of your class, rankings-wise, that you can develop. And Jalot is a guy that I'm predicting, at least in my own personal opinion, as a guy we're going to be seeing in a couple years saying, man, this guy was a steal. I really think that about the guy.
Yeah, and he's a bit of a head scratcher. I think you're right with where his rating sits, and I'm not sure what it is, if it's competition, or if it's just that he doesn't have as much experience or hasn't hit as many camps. There's a lot of things that come into play. But Jalot, like you said, is a freak athlete, and all you need to watch is him on the offensive end at tight end, where he's just hauling in some of these passes, high pointing a lot of these passes that probably shouldn't be caught on his highlight tape, which I was extremely impressed with. I thought that he would look pretty good as a tight end as well in college. But
yeah,
no, like you said, that offer list is pretty ridiculous as far as Vandy and Dartmouth and Duke and a few of the other schools as well. So
he reminds me a little bit of Lorenzo Malden. With the kind of the length that he has, kind of that longer, thin kind of frame, but could still, Malden got up to 265. He was a guy that put on a lot of weight. But, I remember the first time I saw Lorenzo Malden was after the South Florida game when they won the conference. I was actually down at the games. My brother lived down in Tampa, and he was doing backflips down the field in full pads. And I remember looking at my brother and being like, my brother had played college football. I was like, have you ever seen that before? He's like, no, man. He's like, that is not normal to be in full pads, to be a defensive lineman, and just doing backflips like it's nothing. Those freak athlete guys sometimes slip through the cracks because they maybe don't have this or don't have that. And Malden, maybe it was because he wasn't maybe the big time, he wasn't playing big time football where he's from or whatever it may be. Or maybe just, hey, he didn't do the camps. That was a thing when Charlie Strong, I remember talking to Mark Ennis about this years ago, and we talked about how many guys Charlie got that when you see him play, it's like, how is he not a bigger recruit? When you look back, they didn't do the camps. They played – Devontae Parker played football and basketball. He didn't do camps. So Devontae Parker was a 3-star because he didn't do that kind of stuff. So, yeah, if you don't get the exposure, you don't get the rankings either. So sometimes it's that. Sometimes it's, right now we're in the middle of this pandemic and the rankings are kind of wishy-washy as they are because there are no camps. There's no 7-on-7 tournaments. All that stuff is where they get evaluated. So maybe if they have their next season, if we do see high school football played around the country in the fall, which I think we will, these guys will start getting more exposure, and maybe we see a guy like him bump up to a higher 3-star talent because he's doing this again for 2 straight years and he has 20 tackles for loss, whatever it may be. So there's a lot going on, but I think that the film doesn't lie, and I think he's a great player. And like I said, he's got the mental aspect, and he works so hard. These videos, he's supposed to be him working out. He looks like a physical freak. So, I think he's a steal.
Yeah. Now that kind of wraps it up for the defensive commits for Louisville in the 2021 class. That kind of highlights the depth chart for defense and the defensive commits that we've had come in.
Keith Wynne with cardchronicle.com. Like I said, I'm the deputy editor covering football. Check out the site recently. I've been doing posts for all the recruits as they commit. And just recently I've done a recap to kind of catch up since we've had this flurry of commitments. So check us out over there, again, cardchronicle.com.
And then Presley Meyer, BigRedLouis.com, co-host of the Big Red Louis podcast, side expert at Big Red Louis. We got stuff coming out daily, football previews, especially defensive-oriented in focus coming out this week.
All right, and this has been Cardinal Craze on Twitter and YouTube. Go check us out and be sure to tune in for a lot more. All right, well, you guys, go Cards.